In this next lesson, we're going to talk best practices, functions, and macros. So let's get started here. Best practices and acceleration. Where you're really going to start to see a lot of extra power is when you start using Blueprint classes. And that we're going to save for the next section of blueprints. But for now, we're going to talk about functions and macros, and they're really a great segue into Blueprint classes. Some of the same concept exists, especially in terms of reusability. But for now, I put a link into the Unreal documents for Blueprint hotkeys, which can help accelerate your workflow. And we've used some of them so far, like holding down the B key for branch nodes, maybe the D key for delay nodes. Also, if you're like me, and you like your blueprints lined up just so, I've put a link for a blueprint bonus tutorial. This is 3.5 minutes long, and it gives you a tutorial for how to set up your hotkeys in order to quickly align a lot of your blueprints. Finally, I am going to go over commenting and organizing the blueprints, and that segues into functions. Part of organizing is taking pieces of code and putting them together in ways that not only helps organize your blueprints, but it allows you to reuse the same piece of code over and over in different ways. And that's really wonderful. It saves time, and it's also more efficient and functional. We can talk a little bit about functions versus macros, but essentially the input and outputs are there. They're a little bit more there for macros. I'll show how to set them up with functions, and that's really what I'm going to demonstrate in this lesson. So let's jump into Unreal and get started. All right, we're back in Unreal, and let's quickly demonstrate where we were before. So we hit play, we can go in the pool, we're nice and cool. We step out, and we've got a countdown timer that says, hey, the fire doesn't feel hot, and then when the timer stops, then the fire goes back. So how do we make this a little bit more efficient or flexible by using a function? Let's go back in here, and here we are. I'm going to turn these nodes, this should be on, into a function. So I'm going to Control X to copy them, or actually I'm cutting them with Control X, and I'm going to create a new function up here. We'll call it water power up 2, and let's paste those two nodes. So now I could attach this, hit compile, and go back to the event graph and drag one of these down into the scene. And it would work. I mean, this is essentially chunking down those nodes into one node. And we could do better than that, right? We could take this whole set and pipe those into a function as well, or a macro. Now, it's not that flexible until you start adding input and output nodes. That's where functions and macros start to really get more powerful and reusable. So how do you do that? Let's select the function, and here's the inputs area. I can click on the input, and in this case, the input is this invincibility or power up. We could just call it power up. And by default, if we hit F7, we want that to be true. So let's dial that open and make sure that the default value is true. We can pass that value into here so that if it changes, we can modify the output here. And so now, what happens if it changes? So maybe the character gets hit by a debuff and all of a sudden their invincibility is gone. So how would we change the evaluation here? We would want to change the fireproof time from 5 immediately to 0. So let's hit Control W and set it to 0. And how would we know, or how would we go about doing that? Well, we would probably want a branch in there. So holding down the B key and clicking, and then you can just connect here. And so if this turns from true to false, so if it's true, no problem, same as before. If it's false, immediately set it to 0. Okay, great. So then how do we get this information out in a usable way? Well, if you were guessing that we need to do an output, then you would be right. So I'm clicking here. It generates a return node, and let's create a return node of a float variable. So a float, and we'll call this fireproof time output. That's not long at all. All right, so now we can take this and pipe it into here. We can take these two and connect it. But how do we get these two pieces of data into this return node? Well, the easiest way is just to take the setter, so the future-proof time, just hold on the control key, drag it out, and pipe it right in there. So now let's compile, go into the event graph, and we've got water power up 2. Look, there's this output right here. And now, if we wanted to do something like a debuff, let's set it so that if we hit the keyboard K, so keyboard K, we have to scroll up in order to get that. Here's a K. And then what we would want to do is something like set the power up to false. If we did that, then we would have to take this time output and pipe it down here. But first, how do we modify this in a way that's affected by the K key? Well, you can also right click, and we're going to be doing this a lot in the next set of videos, but you can right click and you can promote these nodes to variables. So it's good to show that. We can call this our power up. So instead of new variable, power up. Now that we've got that as a separate output, we can then hold down Alt and drag and create a setter. And so now if we then had that as an issue, we could then modify the power up and set it to false. And then that setting it to false would then trigger this fireproof output time immediately then to trigger and set to 0. And we would pipe down here. Okay, let's hit F7 and see if this works. Now let's hit play. Let's walk in. We feel nice and cool. We step out, but oh, we hit K and immediately we're zeroed out and we don't feel cool anymore. All right, awesome, that works. Let's go back in and just talk about commenting for a second. So we can select these and hit the C key. We add a lot of comments on ARM. This is a function for power up. And we can even circle that around, just that function. And it's a great way to move nodes around. We also talked about adding reroute nodes if we want to make these things look a little bit cleaner. We've done custom functions in previous videos. You can get rid of this first power up. It works, but it's good. Well, that pretty much wraps things up. I'm looking forward to starting to do Blueprint classes in the next set of videos. But that wraps things up. We'll see you in the next one.